Hi, Tom. Can you hear us now?
I can hear you now. Just,
okay. It's great to meet you. Welcome.
It's nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
No, please. Thank you for joining us. We're a big group of professors here in the Zoom meeting, and we're also going live on the YouTube channel. So all the students are there. We have a big number of students, and they will ask some questions at the end of the lecture. I think, okay. Mute Oliverio. Greta, can you please mute Oliverio? Greta, ¿puedes mutear a Oliverio?
Sí, lo estoy buscando en el mazo.
Okay, we need to mute somebody.
Ken, is this the way it's going to look for them? Because it doesn't look that way on my screen. But
yeah, looks perfect.
I think it's just the way my thing is set up. So that's it, I think, right? Okay, just making sure.
Okay, Tom, I will make a short introduction in Spanish. I will introduce you in Spanish to make sure that everybody understands, and then you can start with the lecture. The only thing that we're going to do in terms of translation for students who don't speak any Spanish at all, any English at all, is every 10 minutes or so at the end of each project, or maybe 2 projects, I'll make a very short summary, less than a minute, so that people who couldn't understand anything in English don't get completely lost. So other than that, you can talk for as long as you wish.
Be careful what you wish for.
No, we're eager to hear you. I will switch to Spanish for the introduction now.
Okay.
Hola, ¿cómo están todos? Bueno, espero que estén todos bien. Tardamos un poquitito más en empezar hoy, pero tenemos esta clase sin viajar a la facultad, sin viajar en colectivo o en auto, pero sí vamos a hacer este viaje de arquitectura que venimos haciendo, que empezamos hace unos años, y hoy estamos con Thomas Phifer desde su oficina de New York. Thomas fundó Thomas Phifer and Partners en el año 97, y desde entonces hicieron grandes proyectos de edificios institucionales y culturales. Los más conocidos son el Glenstone Museum, el Corning Museum of Glass y el North Carolina Museum of Art, y están también en proceso de construcción de otros edificios institucionales importantes, como el Museum of Modern Art de Varsovia o el Complejo de Cine Colombia en Bogotá. Su empresa ganó, su estudio ganó muchos reconocimientos de la American Institute of Architects. Tienen un libro monográfico publicado por la editorial Rizzoli, y Tom ganó el Rome Prize in Architecture en el año 95, antes de fundar su empresa, y antes de eso trabajó muchos años junto a Richard Mayer y antes junto a Watney Siegel. Tom tiene una gran actividad académica, además de su práctica profesional. Fue visiting professor en las universidades de Columbia, Cooper Union, University of Southern California, University of Texas, University of Pennsylvania, y fue William Henry Bishop visiting professor y Louis Kahn visiting professor en la Universidad de Yale. Así que me paso al inglés ahora para darle la bienvenida. Le conté a Tom que la charla va a ser, por supuesto, en inglés, y cada 10 minutos o cada 1 o 2 proyectos yo voy a hacer una muy breve síntesis de lo que Tom está contando para los que les cueste más seguirlo. De todos modos, si la ven de vuelta un rato más tarde, ya se le pueden poner subtítulos en YouTube, y estos subtítulos se pueden traducir, y esto sale bastante bien. So, hi Tom, thank you for joining us. It's a great pleasure to have you. I was telling the story of your firm and something about your projects. But more important than that, and on a personal level, both my partner Axel Friedman, who's also a professor and is here, and myself, we've been following your work for a long time, and it was a great excitement for us to see the drawings of the Glenstone Museum, and then the pictures of those incredible pictures of the photographs of the completed building. So we feel like it's a great opportunity for our professors and students to have the chance to hear you. So thank you for joining us and for accepting our invitation.
Well, that's so nice, and it is such a pleasure to meet you, and an absolute honor to be invited. So thank you so much. I want to, what I'd like to do today is talk about just 4 projects. But before we start on the projects, I want to just show you this picture of the office here, because this table has been here almost since the beginning of the practice here in New York. We're in an old printing building here. And kind of West Soho, if you know New York. And I remember when I was in here alone, kind of starting to practice, the presses were still rumbling on the other floors, and the floors would shake, and it was very much an industrial area that was very gritty here on the lower west side of Manhattan. Since then, it's gotten much more gentrified. But we've been working around this table like a family dining table. And we talk all day. Everyone sits around this. And it's really become a huge part of our culture here over the years. It's the way we work. It's the way we communicate. It's the way we distill things. We do it all together. And so today I'd like to talk about these 4 museums. And we started working on these in about, I don't know, 2004 or so. So ever since then, we've been working on museum projects. They seem to have overlapped in an interesting way. And I think it's interesting to track the development of these projects with the development of our practice. So I thought maybe these would be 4 good projects that I could take you through in some detail. First of all, the North Carolina Museum of Art. When I came down just after we had received the commission, I saw this remarkable wall hanging, this giotto here. And it happened to be lit only with artificial light, but it was spectacular. The gold, the significance of this work. And over time, as we began to work on the project, we wanted to bring this project, this giotto into the light. We wanted to bring it into the light. And here is the site for the North Carolina Museum of Art. It's in the capital city, Raleigh, North Carolina. It's got 160 acres of land, and it's got an existing building designed by the architect Edward Durrell Stone that is there. Unfortunately, it was completed after his death, and they tried to save a lot of money, so it's not a spectacular building. And everything inside it is absolutely no daylight, and everything is lit with artificial light. But you can see our addition up there in the upper left corner. And so the planning strategy for this, because this is a state museum, the museum is free. So we didn't have that requirement that everyone has to pass by the front desk. And this is a state museum. It belongs to the people of North Carolina. And we wanted the experience here to be open and welcoming and participate in the beauty of this park, of this landscape, of this place. And so rather than making one front door, we made 5 front doors so that you can be in the park and come into one of these gardens and go in and out of the museum without ever going in the front door or by the front desk. And so it became this way of really opening the collection, opening the experience and the art up to this extraordinary place here and celebrating the landscape and celebrating your experience and your heightened experience in the land. And we began to study many, many precedents here. Since this was our first museum, most of you know the Louisiana Museum that's in Denmark. It sits as a series of experiences, and even the galleries like this one are quiet, but they have these enormous windows that make the landscape and the land and the light a part of the experience of the art. And then you pause between these rooms and you walk in a passage as if you're walking in the landscape. So it's very much a part of the experience here. That landscape in that beautiful park that's around the Louisiana became a part of the art experience. And so here was an early rendering that I wanted to show you because it speaks about trying to get these courtyards, these special gardens to come into the experience of the museum. So that every moment that you move through any one of these places there through the collection, that you'd constantly be referred to the light and to those gardens. You have an opportunity to step out into a garden. But we also put everything on one floor, all 75,000 square feet, so that we could daylight the gallery, so that all of them have light. Because nature is not just grass and trees. Nature is light. It's the movement of light. It's the celebration of light in our lives that marks the passage of time. And so as much as we wanted nature to come into these courtyards and gardens, become a part of the experience, we wanted the daylight, the changing light, to be a part of this experience as well, so that nature would completely embody your experience here. One of the first buildings I saw when I came to Europe for the first time back in the 70s was Sir John Soane's Dulwich Gallery here, where I walked into this as a student, and just the beauty of the light when a cloud moved overhead, which happened when I was there the first time, the whole atmosphere of that room changed. And he brought the light in very high so that it had time to wash down on the pictures and enrich the experience. And so we didn't have a big budget for this. So every gesture had to matter and be cost efficient. And so we made these enormous coffers that took the light and it softly moved them over that light over to the walls. We spent a lot of time with physical models and computer models. This one component only cost a little over $3,000. So very, very inexpensive. It spanned on its own 27 feet. and it's only 1/4 of an inch thick, very, very thin. And this was the moment to let daylight move over to the walls. And this drawing begins to demonstrate how the roof comes down, celebrating the experience with light, and how the courtyards move into each one of these places where there is a different collection. There is contemporary art here, there's modern art, there's European and American paintings, there are Egyptian works, it is an encyclopedic collection. And so all of this weaves into this experience constantly with gardens there. And here is one of the gardens, and you can come into this garden with these beautiful Rodin sculptures. The courtyards line the galleries with glass, so that transparency that's offered there from the courtyards to the galleries, and from the galleries to these courtyards with doors you can go in and out. So in this bamboo garden, these Rodins live, and right inside this are the Rodins that are inside the gallery experience. This picture offers this moment where you see a courtyard there to the left, and you see my beautiful Giotto there that we brought into the light. Now, clearly, to bring light into a museum, you can't damage the art with too much light. You can never have direct light. And so our journey, we worked with Ova Arab to develop a program for the light and a yearly lighting budget so that these works of art live in a very prescribed program that was developed by the curators and the conservators of the museum, so that we give light to these places, but it's very controlled and very tuned. We also worked very closely with all of the building officials here and all of the lighting designers, so that the lights are small. On this track that you see up there, we have a little camera for security. We've got sprinklers there so that you're not distracted by those building elements there. So when you look at a work, you can begin to feel that work without distraction. And here are those coffers here, as you see. They bring down a beautiful even light. The light levels for the contemporary works are a little higher. The lights for the sculpture are a little higher even. And so up in this oculus up there, we have changeable scrims, changeable fabric that's very easy to move out and change it so that every light level in the museum you can tune and make it a direct response to the work that sits underneath it. So it's a very flexible system. Here's the African collection as it begins to open to this courtyard here. These rooms don't ever have four corners. It's like an open pavilion, so that the work from one moment, like the American works or the works that are behind the wall here, they open directly up to these Rodins. And the director and the curators wanted everything in the building to be white, so that the Egyptian mummies, the European and American pictures, the contemporary works, all live on the same white background. So you see these works as one expression of our work as the history of art. Here are the American pictures. We have some galleries that are very simple, that open very clearly to others. And then we have others that begin, these are the beautiful European and American pictures. So the museum is very quietly curated. That's a courtyard there that's to the left-hand side. The museum is very sparsely hung. This remarkable European picture here sits alone on that wall so that you're left with that work, this light, in a very quiet gallery without distraction. And so as you enter the museum, this is the main front door. And you arrive from the park. And you immediately come into this kind of passageway, this outdoor passageway. And it was in honor of Dan Graham, that amazing sculptor who worked in glass. And Dan Graham taught us that rather than grounding a work of architecture with indigenous materials found on the site, local materials, you place the work there. Dan Graham said that through reflection and light and transparency, you place that work in its place, in its setting. And so as you walk here, this glass is slightly reflective and slightly transparent. The mullions are reflective. The ceiling is transparent. is reflective. So that as you move into this, it's a 12-foot ceiling here, and you begin to heighten your experience with the landscape as you move in. This is Ursula von Reitingswald, and this very simple facade that is all made out of anodized aluminum, very, very large panels. And you can see the skylight shape that's above those. And we separated these panels a little bit because we've got a little piece of reflective metal that's back in that gap right there. So as the light begins to hit that, as you begin to move against the facade all of a sudden becomes completely reflective. But what we learned about these highly anodized panels is that it begins to reflect very, very softly the trees and the sky and the land. So that in a sense, as the landscape begins to rise up around the building, hopefully the architecture then begins to blend with the architecture begins to blend with the landscape. It begins to blur that distinction so that over time, this really becomes a reflection of this place and of this land and of this light. This is that bamboo garden with the Rodins in the water and Ursula's work as you begin to go into the park. I'll take a short break here.
Yeah, I will make a short translation. Primero, Tom contó que su estudio es una gran mesa, es un edificio que era un edificio industrial, una antigua imprenta que cuando empezaron a trabajar todavía estaba funcionando, y la idea de trabajar todos alrededor de una mesa es como una especie de cena familiar en la que todo el mundo comparte lo que va pasando. Entonces, en ese lugar se produjeron los 4 museos que nos va a contar. El primero es el Museo de Arte de North Carolina, en la ciudad de Raleigh, en un terreno muy grande donde hay un edificio existente que se terminó de construir después de la muerte del arquitecto. Entonces, es una obra en la que ahorraron mucho dinero, no tiene luz natural, y lo primero que le llamó la atención es este grabado de Giotto que mostró, que es espectacular, sin embargo, estaba todo iluminado con luz artificial. Entonces el museo se trata de sacar esta obra de Giotto a la luz, trabajar con la luz y hacer un edificio en un parque. El edificio tiene estos patios que entran dentro del volumen, y como es un museo estatal y es gratis, no es tan importante el control de la entrada, no se cobra entrada, entonces el edificio tiene 5 entradas principales y uno puede recorrer el museo mientras recorre el parque. Todo el programa está en un solo piso para que todo pueda tener luz natural, los 7.500 metros, y Tom explica que la naturaleza no es solo los árboles y el pasto, sino principalmente la luz y cómo la luz cambia con el momento del día. Para eso, el principal precedente para él es la Dulwich Gallery de Sir John Sloane en Londres, que trabaja con la luz viniendo desde muy arriba. Entonces, a partir de eso, armaron estas piezas de cielo raso y estas lucarnas que permiten tener luz indirecta en todo el museo. El armado interior es con paredes que nunca forman dos esquinas, y de esta manera se arma un recorrido fluido, y la entrada es este lugar que refleja, siguiendo la idea del escultor Dan Graham, de que poner algo en un lugar no se logra trabajando con materiales de ese lugar o con esa tierra, sino que se puede hacer también a través de los reflejos y los transparencias. Thank you, Tom.
So the next project is the Corning Museum of Glass in Corning, New York, way upstate in New York, way to the north of New York. This is a museum for contemporary glass, the glass of our time. And this is a place where they invent new ways to use glass. If any of you have an iPhone, I think probably Samsung phones too, that glass on the face is made by Corning. So they have 5,200 researchers up in Corning making glass. So there is a legacy here of glass. And so we were commissioned to make a museum for contemporary glass. We had never worked with glass before. And so one of the first things we did is we took an alto vase just to get a sense out on the street here in New York. And we got it out into the sunlight, and all of a sudden that vase came alive, completely came alive. And we began then to learn that glass is not damaged by light. It loves light. It is very sensitive, though, to temperature and humidity. So we knew that we could begin with the expression here and with the art to let in an enormous amount of light into this experience, much, much more than any other museum for paintings or other sculptures. And here is the setting there. You can see our building there to the right. Laurie Hawkinson and Henry Smith Miller's building is in the blue, and an architect, Gunnar Burkertz, back in the early 70s made another. So this was the completed route, the completed circuit. And just to the top in blue there, we renovated an old Corning glass factory as an auditorium, as a place to watch how glass is made in this old historic building. So you can see how glass is made. They have artists coming to this place, and then that art is moved into these galleries. And so after we made that experiment up here about just taking our glass out, we used OVA Arup again on all of the daylighting and artificial light. And we asked them just to put a glass object in their computer. And exactly the same thing happened, where this glass is just exploding with light. You begin to see things that you never imagined. You could see if the work was under a dim light. The light made this collection come alive. This is a remarkably important work for us. This is Ronnie Horn. You can see with her work, this is a completely solid glass cube of glass that embodies the light. It holds the light. It contains the light. And it is this vitrine for the light. It was such an inspiration for us about not only about the light, but about making this building with all of its light contain and hold the light in the same amazing way that Ronnie Horn works with light. The other thing we wanted to do, which all of these pieces are sculptural glass, and they sit on the floor. So we started thinking about these rooms as soft rooms. We began to think about them as clouds, so that the corners are only in one place where you begin to walk to another gallery, but they're soft. And all of the light is channeled through these concrete beams directly down into the collections. So you walk in, the softness of the walls, the light, these works just float, and they become the star of the show. We also learned that if you put glass next to a window, it begins to silhouette itself, and you lose all of the form of that glass. So these 5 rooms that are interior rooms here get top light, but we made this porch on the outside so that you can come out of that room, you can have this window that looks out into the Corning campus, and then go back into a room so that you get this experience of this porch and the campus, and you go in and you get the experience of these rooms with very simple, pure light and the works themselves. And so these walls are very simple and very soft and very sculptural. This looks between 2 rooms with this knife edge here as this softness comes to a point as you transition between rooms. We let in an enormous amount of light, and because direct light here doesn't hurt the art at all, we have about 15% of the skylight lights above that are clear glass, so that you get these moments of light that are dancing around this place all day long. You begin to feel, not only with the amount of light, but you feel the moving light of these clear glass moments beginning to come through. And here you can see the softness of a portal as you begin to move. And here is the campus. It's an historic campus. They've got these remarkable black buildings there in the foreground that were designed by Wallace Harrison back in the 1950s. Some of the first curtain wall glass buildings. And you can see the other 2, Laurie Hawkinson and Henry Smith Miller, and Gerner Burkitts, and that's our white building there that sits as this optimistic vitrine that holds the light and holds the contemporary glass. We almost gave up. We had this idea of making a very thin concrete beam that would take the light and channel it down and push it down to the floor. We also wanted it to be a part of the structure. But we finally found this one place in all of North America that would make this, and they are out in the wilderness up in Canada. And they made these beams perfectly. They are just 4 inches thick. They're 4.5 feet tall, and they are in some cases 60 feet long, and they are perfect. And here they are, you're looking up at the beams here. You can see we have some solid panels, some translucent panels, and some clear panels. And we've put the artificial lights, which come on when it gets completely dark, up there. And it provides this order for these soft walls. You can see the softness here and the order of these beams and the thinness of these beams. And there's one of my favorite works, this Gardner, and you can see how there are these rays of light that are here, but in a blink of an eye, those are gone. And you get these moments of this direct light, and then the other 85, 90% of the time, you get this soft light, but a lot of light. This is an important drawing because we wanted not only for these beams to channel the light, but to take the forces, take not only the vertical load of the skylight and the gutters, but also to take all of the horizontal forces from the facade. And so the beams act structurally, and they all come back to these soft walls. So that wall in the middle that's so thick is like the core of an office building structurally. It takes all of the vertical loads, but it also takes all of the lateral loads. And it takes the air, it takes the heated air, it takes the cool air, and these walls contain the air. So it's structure, it's light, and it's all of the services. We paid special attention to all the sprinklers and all of the devices so that they would all be as hidden as possible. There's our little lift right there. That was what determined the spacing of the beams so that you could go up there to repair and to maintain the roof. And so here is the order of the beams, the softness of the walls, and this work that, in a normal building like in North Carolina, we only have in some cases 30 to 40 foot candles. Here we have 350 foot candles coming into this place. And there is just this one ray of light, and in the wink of an eye, that little moment is gone. And you begin to feel the passage of time, the passage of those seconds, and you begin to feel the light. Light is nature. It's a passage, it moves, it changes color. And so as these walls come together, then that is the place where you enter. And so it becomes this moment of a corner. All the other corners are soft, except for the ones that you walk through, the passages. And you can see the order of the beams as they come over. We wanted you to see the campus here. But we didn't want to use clear glass. We had this notion that we wanted to wrap this in a vitrine of white glass. And so as that white glass begins to come over the windows, it becomes a frosted glass. So you can feel that thin layer. If it's glass, it's transparent, it dissolves. The surface goes away. But with white glass, you see the garden, but you see it in a different way that lets you feel this vitrine, this surface. And here is this remarkable Wallace Harrison building that's there to the left. one of the first curtain wall buildings built in the United States back in the 1950s. And our building facing that across this town green for the campus. Our building is very simple. It doesn't shout. It has a presence, this whiteness, this optimistic whiteness that's there as a reflection of this vitrine that contains the works of our time. It's connected over to Laurie and Henry's building there with this black connector. And as you can see, the facade changes. It has a bit of a reflectivity and some light, and it also has this mist quality to it as well that begins to blur the presence of this object. Okay.
Okay, my turn. Este es el museo de vidrio de Corning en el norte del estado de New York. Y Corning es una empresa, y este es un museo que se dedican al vidrio contemporáneo. Esta es una fábrica que tiene 50.000 investigadores sobre las propiedades del vidrio y el desarrollo de nuevos tipos de vidrio. Por ejemplo, todos los vidrios de los celulares o de los iPhone son de Corning. Entonces, para empezar a pensar en un museo del vidrio, lo primero que hicieron fue tomar un jarrón de ámbar alto, sacarlo a la vereda en New York, hacer que le dé la luz, y descubrieron que pasaban cosas espectaculares cuando la luz le pegaba al vidrio, y que la luz no dañaba al vidrio como pasa con las obras de arte, y hay que cuidarlo, sino que con un edificio para vidrio permite tener muchísima más luz. Entonces, esto es la ampliación de otros museos que existen, y la idea es tener la mayor cantidad de luz posible. El techo es de paneles casi todos transparentes, y las paredes son estas paredes curvas para definir lo que él llama cuartos blandos. Y este techo de vidrio transparente se sostiene por unas vigas que fueron muy difíciles de hacer. Son vigas muy finitas, de 10 centímetros de ancho, 1,35 m de altura, y que tienen una luz entre apoyos de 20 metros. Solamente consiguieron un lugar, después de mucho trabajo, que las fabricara en Canadá, pero estas vigas fueron lo que le permitieron lograr este efecto de que la luz baje. Las vigas además sostienen el techo de vidrio, sostienen las canaletas, y apoyan en unas vigas curvas dobles, que son las que forman las paredes estas de los cuartos blandos, que contienen en su interior todos los elementos técnicos. Y esto produce como momentos efímeros de luz directa, esos rayitos que se ven en las fotos y que rápidamente, enseguida, desaparecen. La fachada es de vidrio esmerilado en la parte que hay ventanas, y vidrio blanco en el resto. Y esto produce un edificio que es un edificio simple, sin estridencias, pero un edificio optimista dentro de este campus de edificios oscuros. Thank you.
So next to the Glenstone Museum, that is located about 30 minutes outside of Washington, D.C. And I love this picture. This is the painter Ed Reinhardt. You can see him here looking at your picture, these amazing black paintings. But if you look long enough, you can see another figure that begins to emerge. It could be a big cross. It could be a big horizontal line across this picture. But what he wanted you to do with his work is to take the time to get lost in the work, to have a slow experience, to heighten your experience with the work, so that when you take the time, your experience becomes richer. And so as we move through the design of the Glenstone project, we had this constantly in mind. How do you interpret architecture like this? How do you make architecture like this? that takes this slow experience and enriches your experience with the art itself. This was a hugely important image for us. This is the site that it was an old horse farm out there, very much rolling hills. You're out in nature. We framed this here as a way of celebrating the heightening experience of framing the land and heightening the experience. Before we started much of anything, before we even started the design or what this might be, we started making these simple renderings about trying to frame the land as an idea at many different scales, as a way of warming up and trying to understand the values that we're going to shape this work. And so here's our site plan right here. And you can see up in the upper left-hand corner, you park. And you park in these rows of trees. And you leave your car behind. You leave the radio behind. And you walk to that little small building right there that's a timber building. And you get oriented. You're greeted there. There's a little bookstore. And from there, you walk through the field. And you have this slowness, this way of moving through the landscape, moving through it and beginning for the world to drop away and prepare you for the art. And then on the peninsula up there, you see the different pavilions. Each one of the pavilions a different size, a different character of light. And they're built on an existing peninsula of land. Because this is where the old barns were built that used to be there. We take the kind of Swiss attitude of building where other people had built, but no other place. We didn't want to disturb any of the other landscape. We wanted to build where others had built. And so as you begin to come around the corner, you can see these pavilions as they begin to sit very softly into this peninsula of land. The program for this was completely different than any other museum. 10 out of the 12 rooms here were seen as permanent rooms in perpetuity, either with one artist or one work of art. So they were going to be there. So we worked with each individual artist on the proportion of their room, on the character of the light in their room, and then to honor them, to honor this work, to honor this light, we pulled these apart so that you'd see them as individual vitrines, individual forms, individual rooms. These are rooms that would then sit quietly in the landscape, and it would merge the landscape, the architecture, and the art all at once. And so as you come down the stair, you see this pool, this lotus pool, this planted pool. And every time you go into one of these rooms, you always return to this center garden here. And you have a moment, you have a bench, you can look out in the garden, which gives you time and it gives you distance before you move into the next pavilion. It prepares you. It slows the experience down so that every room becomes an experience, but always back to this garden. And we learned this from Rionji, this remarkable temple and rock garden in Japan, in Kyoto. How you see the sky and you see the immediate landscape, but you don't see the horizon. And you walk to this room, this outdoor room, and you sit here with the light. And with nature, losing the horizon and having this experience. And here are the models we had that we made in the office that we constantly changed for a long, long time. And you can see all of the pavilions except 2 of them, as prescribed by the artist, all have daylight. They don't turn on lights here. It's all lived in the light, and all different kinds of light. You can see the beauty of the topography with this model taken from another angle. How these pavilions sit here in exactly the landscape that we found. We had to dig it up to build it, but then we put it back precisely the same way. We also removed the food. That little pavilion that's down closest to the camera here is a cafe. So we've kept the books and the food out of the experience. So this is only about you and the art. We started making these special renderings here, showing these pavilions as they sat quietly there in the land. I admired for a long time these charcoal renderings that were made by a very special renderer. And we learned how to make these renderings on the computer. So we made these, the softness, the quality of the black and white gave us this sense of abstraction in the land. On the other side, and you can see the varying topography as the topography moves. And so as you come into the front door, you're greeted with this Lawrence Weiner text work here, with a ley light, with a skylight. You're greeted here, and then you just simply follow the light. You go around this right-hand corner, and you come into this place where you see a stair that's also lit. You follow the light, and this stair then leads you down. It's like moving into the earth. It's like Michael Heiser and those works he made way back when in the 60s and 70s about just digging a hole in the desert and experiencing going below the datum of the earth. Here we wanted to go down and experience these passages as if carved in the earth. And here is that stair as you're moving down with the light above. And each room is completely different. These are these remarkable sculptures by Cy Twombly. And you can see with these, we worked with Cy Twombly to put this ley light at the top so that the light would push down the sides of this room through this skylight and move directly down to light the art. And with Michael Heiser, we worked on this outdoor room with him. The proportion of the room, his work, the size of this room, opening up to the sky, was a remarkable collaboration with an amazing artist. This is what I call the Renaissance cube here. It's a cubic gallery. This is one of the two changing galleries where it's a cube. There's a simple concrete oculus at the top that lets this beautiful light in. Hey, Kim, would you mind going and getting my water in the fridge? Thank you. The other thing we tried to do is have the air, all of the air as a diffuser come out of that little tiny 1-inch slot that's at the top. And it returns in that little tiny 1-inch slot that's at the bottom. So again, removing distractions so that your experience with the art is this pure experience. And you can see that these passages begin to get thick. You're walking in the earth. You're walking as if in a castle that's below the earth. And all of a sudden you come into the light. Thank you, Kim. So it seems to believe that maybe we organized these pavilions in the landscape based on a kind of massing strategy from the outside. But no, these pavilions and their relationship to one another is all about your experience of moving through this passage and into the rooms. And I'm always reminded of Lucan's remarkable observation that shade and shadow and deep shadow belong to the light. They're not different. They're the same. They all belong to the light. And so as you move through the passage, you get shade. You get graduated light. You move into these rooms with light. And then in the distance, going into the Bryce Martin room there, you get deep shadow. And then you get shadow, and then you turn to the left and you're into a lit room. So it's a journey through the passage of light, never turning on any artificial lights, but letting it be this journey. So as we move these apart to get this experience, we began to just honor this light. Here's this amazing sculptor, Charlie Ray, with his room. We worked on this room with him. He will curate this room with a collection of the Glenstone Foundation once a year for 10 years. This is Ronnie Horn, whose works are in the passage itself, this kind of embodiment of light. These cast glass moments that receive the light from the passage. And then this room that is on Carrara, he wanted a really tall room. This room that's 45 feet tall up to the concrete. So that the light would have a long way to fall. These are his date paintings that honor the day he said he was the most excited in his life. It represents those dates in 1969 when the moon landing happened. And here are a couple of sections that we began to conceive these rooms. You can see that these concrete oculuses that reach for the sky up there, they're deep. They're 15, 16 feet and 12 feet. And they let the light have a long way to fall to get that softness in the light. And you can see how they're separated from the shadows in the passage as you begin to enter them. As you sit on a bench, you constantly come back to this pool of water with the sky and with the light. You're watching the movement of the light. You begin to get lost and separate and begin to prepare yourself for the next room. Here's this room that we affectionately call the pause room. When you've gone through over half of the rooms, you come to this wood-lined room with a big window that opens out to the land. And we're reminded of this framing of the landscape through Mies van der Rohe, probably the greatest house, in my view, one of the greatest houses ever, but certainly in America, where Mies framed this horizontal landscape, this horizontal natural landscape, and heightened the experience of this. I mean, it is just a masterwork. And so as you sit on this bench with Martin Purrier here, you have this enormous window that frames your view of the landscape and heightens your experience and gives you that pause, that slowness. And so just a few views of the pool and these rooms as they begin to come into the pool. We were wondering for a long time what to make the building out of. And here, we finally learned to lean on Carl Andre, where he took and bought this lumber at the lumber yard, and he cut it precisely. And he stacked it precisely. And he took something that was ordinary and made it extraordinary. And so we wanted to do that with my favorite material, concrete. But not concrete that has a lot of admixtures in it to make it the same. We wanted you to feel the nature of the material. And those blocks that get poured in the summertime are lighter because they hydrate, the water leaves them. In the wintertime, the darker blocks hold the water. And if you're lucky enough to have it rain when the forms are stripped, a block permanently streaks. And so when you see this tapestry of this, the honesty of this material. We have 25,000 blocks. They were poured over 18 months. So you got all temperatures and humidities and sunlight and rain, all of that affecting the material as it begins to reflect its true nature. They laid this beautifully. These crews laid this. It's a 6-foot block, which is the weight that this machine could take to lay it very easily. And they did a remarkably precise job here. Here's a wall section showing the green roof and the passage and these enormous pieces of glass. They're 9 feet by 25 feet high that start way down at the base, hidden, they're clamped there. And then they go all the way up to the top and provide the handrail. You can see the block on the outside, the concrete ceiling, the undercroft for all of the mechanical servicing. And to the left there is the pool of water. These trays of planting materials that move through, that hold different plants depending on the season. You can take them out, replace them easily, and they grow and become this part of this merging of nature from the field into the pool with the light, with framing the sky, this kind of silence here, trying to find that silence. Okay.
Este es el Museo de Glenstone, que queda a 30 minutos de Washington, D.C. Y Tom cuenta que empezaron con este cuadro, esta imagen del artista Ad Reinhardt con sus cuadros negros, que les hizo entender que después de mirar un rato estos cuadros negros donde parecía que no había nada, uno empieza a descubrir pequeñas cosas y pequeños dibujos. Entonces esto les hizo entender que el arte tiene que ver con una experiencia lenta y con tomarse el tiempo para poder hacer el descubrimiento. Este era un terreno grande donde había una antigua caballeriza, entonces la estrategia es estacionar muy lejos del museo, ser recibidos por un pabellón donde está el restaurante y el negocio, y a partir de ahí iniciar un camino que te lleva a estos cubos que son las salas. Cada cubo pertenece a un artista o a una obra, Entonces esto les permitió estudiar las características especiales de luz de cada uno. Y la principal operación de diseño es separarlos y generar con eso el recorrido y el movimiento. Se arma un jardín central entre las cajas, donde tomaron como esta idea del patio Zen de Ryoanji en Kioto, que tiene que ver con ver el cielo, ver los árboles, pero no ver el horizonte. Entonces eso te transporta como una dimensión especial. Y tanto los libros como la comida, toda la parte comercial del museo está fuera de esto, está como lejos, cerca de los autos y no dentro de este lugar distinto. La luz te guía desde que vos entrás, eh, y una frase que para él era muy importante es esta idea de Kant de que la sombra y la sombra profunda también pertenecen a la luz. Entonces, esto es un trabajo con las distintas graduaciones de luz, con las distintas alturas de las salas y profundidad de las lucarnas, para que esto funcione de distinta manera. Hay en el medio del recorrido un cuarto de madera con una ventana hacia el exterior, que es un cuarto de pausa, donde se enmarca el paisaje. Y en relación a los materiales, toman esta idea del artista Carl André con esta escultura de madera, que tiene que ver con tomar un material convencional, en este caso madera, pero cortarlo y ordenarlo de manera muy precisa. Entonces hacen eso con el hormigón, arman estos bloques de hormigón que se van llenando a lo largo de 18 meses en distintas situaciones de temperatura y humedad, esto hace que tengan leves variaciones de color y textura, que son lo que después dan el efecto de las paredes. Thank you.
Thank you. So the last project is in Warsaw, which is certainly part of, belongs to the world at this particular moment, as we all know what's going on in Ukraine. The compassion of the people of Warsaw has been remarkable to see, but I've seen it for 6 years as I've been making this building. They are remarkably compassionate and loving people. This has been a life-changing experience working in that city. And I've kept this in the lecture for years, but it becomes a little more topical now. This is what Warsaw looked like back in the 50s as the Germans left and as the Russians began to take over. They just completely bombed the city. And you can see the palace of culture that's there in the background. That was a gift from Stalin. And with the earth just completely flattened around it. So it was only back in the 1950s. And here is this white building that looks like it belongs in Chicago that they called the Palace. There was a parade ground, there was a boulevard. As you can see, they started rebuilding the subway here in the foreground. But in the meantime, they have then started to rebuild the commercial center of the city once they became a part of the EU, a part of Europe. This commercial architecture began to happen. Shopping began to happen. Retail, restaurants, all framing around this palace that was then recaptured by the people of Warsaw. And this is the center of the city. This is where they have soccer celebrations. It's where they have rallies. It's where they have protests. In front of this palace, they have completely taken it over for themselves. It's now called the Palace of Culture. It is theirs now. And this is where they come to. And so we were dealing with these two different institutions. One is a museum, MSN. The other is TR, which is a contemporary theater group. And these are not works like one has in Glenstone with Jeff Koons and Bryce Marden and those kind of artists. These are artists that make work. Most of them live in Poland. Most of them live in the East there. And so it is work about their time and about their notion of their place in this moment. So they're controversial. They speak about the history. They speak about what the future ought to be. They have theater. They have art. They're present in the city as the voice of these people. And here is a commentary of what happened after the war. Monika Sosnowska made this piece as a crumpled up structure of a building that she didn't think was responsive, that was built after the war. She very accurately built this frame and then crushed it as an expression of the lack, as she said, of rebuilding Warsaw with this openness in this housing block. The theater is designed as a dark building, as a classic black box, so that the lights, the actors, the sets, the audience, they come alive, not the architecture. The architecture fades into the background. So whenever you cross this threshold, you begin to enter this darkened world. Every experience in here is darkened in every room. So that as the actors, as the audience begins, those are the highlights, the stars, the heightened experience. But then the museum is this vitrine of light, this whiteness, this vitrine, these contemporary moments, these moments of light and framing the light with these works and celebrating the light in the middle of Warsaw. And so we have shadow and we have light for the two buildings. First of all, we started making this sense of abstraction. You can see in the upper right, we sit between the palace with its memories, with its history. And we sit between that and commercial architecture. We wanted to find this sense of abstraction and this sense of permanence and this sense of a strong architecture, that these two buildings could live in this place and be a permanent place for these two institutions and live in the world and the history of the palace and live in the world of Warsaw. And so one building is white concrete with all of its abstraction. And the other is black steel from Gdansk, from the shipyards. And you can see here, we are well into construction, but you can see how beautiful they're pouring this spectacular white concrete here. Corners are sharp. It's just a spectacular reflection of this materiality. And on the right, you can see these solid steel columns, this frame that's there with these thick plates, these steel plates that have this kind of order, that have this darkened, shadowed presence. But the theater is extremely open. It's open to the people of Warsaw. It's welcoming. They can have performances in the square and inside. You can walk through and see the sets being made for a performance. These enormous doors close, and you can have a performance only on the inside. This is the size of an aircraft hangar, so that you can have these completely flexible spaces that begin to get opened up to the city. I love this Richard Serra work right here because it begins to speak about this shadowed world, this space without definition, trying to find this shadow that is so mysterious and so much about this theater experience there on the left. We look to Louise Nevelson, who has been all about this darkness, this shadow, this shade. And that's a reflected ceiling plan on the right-hand side there, where we wanted to capture that in the ceilings, this darkness, where some is shade, where some is shadow, and where some is just lost in the darkness. There is the building as it sits with its simple order against the palace. You can see we're here in the middle of the city. The theater's in red. The museum is in blue. We had a very strict zoning here with the necessity for arcades and a constant height that we had to make. And here are these two buildings as they live together around this living room, around this place that is joined between them. It's a space that belongs to both. It's a space that belongs to the city. And so the museum is all about these thresholds and connections to the city. The arcade there that goes all the way around is a deep arcade. It's a threshold. You walk through that lower section and the ceiling goes up to 5.5 meters immediately. And you move through that and then move into the building. It has this kind of time-honored arcade that is so wonderful in every culture as this threshold from the city into this experience. We have an auditorium there with big sliding glass doors. We have a special gallery that's curated every month. We have education, we have a bookstore, we have a cafe that opens. And then on the upper levels, these blue areas are these city rooms where you take a pause. And you look out an enormous window at the city and you begin to get oriented again. So the facades are extremely simple and reflect these city rooms and a terrace so that they begin to simply reflect the experience that's there on the inside with that big arcade that goes around. And here again, this kind of heightening experience of framing the landscape and heightening the experience. And so the city rooms are lined in wood with a bench. There's the library there that's to the left. We wanted the stair to be a social experience, a place where you meet friends, where you see friends. It's a classical stair. It starts in one place, they part, and then they come back together. You can go up one way and down the other. And it becomes this central way of moving through and up and down this building with light. We get an enormous amount of light at the top of this that celebrates the climbing of one floor to the next and celebrates this movement, this vertical movement that you constantly come back to. Here are the simple facades in this white concrete, and the rendering here. There's a terrace above, and you can see the arcade down at the bottom and the castle that peeks up. The facades are extremely simple. This sense of abstraction and strong architecture to live in this place in Warsaw. This is a house of rooms. We learned about rooms at Glenstone there to the right. And these rooms are now put into these simple volumes that are all different sizes. There are no flexible spaces in Warsaw. They all are different sizes with different characters of light. And so each room is like the Cy Twombly room here. Here's one of the galleries. When you come up to the top floor, these galleries are 7.5 meters tall to the beams, and the works are celebrated on the top with light. Here's the section where you come under into these monumental arcades that are the threshold to the city. And the galleries on the +1 level and the +2 level, getting light from the sides on the +1 level and from the top, constantly all the way through that top floor. We built a model of every single gallery, every single space. These beams are structural beams, they're concrete. They form the rhythm of the structure that's built over the subway. So it reflects the nature of the construction and of the way the forces in the building are resolved. And they become this theater for art and this theater for impromptu performance. On the +1 level, it gets this beautiful sense of high clear story light in every art room. And these two buildings living together around this forum, living at the base of the palace and at the base of the commercial. Okay, thank you.
I will translate this. Este es el museo y el teatro de Varsovia. Después de años de trabajar en esa ciudad, Tom quiere mucho al pueblo de Varsovia y también cuenta que apoya mucho a Ucrania en este momento con la guerra y la invasión. Y muestra las imágenes de Varsovia después de la guerra, una ciudad totalmente destruida en la que Stalin regala este Palacio de la Cultura para construir el nuevo centro de la ciudad, totalmente vacío alrededor, y que después, a partir de la unión de Polonia a la Unión Europea, se va llenando de arquitectura comercial y se va construyendo un centro comercial allí. Y en este lugar el proyecto tiene que albergar dos instituciones, el museo y un teatro contemporáneo, y que a diferencia de los artistas americanos, estos son artistas controversiales, cuya obra es un comentario sobre la posguerra y sobre la situación actual de la historia y la situación actual de Polonia. El teatro es una caja negra, el museo es una caja blanca de luz, y tratan de ser lo más abstractos posibles entre la arquitectura del palacio y la arquitectura comercial de los 90. La abstracción es lo que le permite encajar en este contexto. El museo es de hormigón blanco, el teatro es de acero, fabricado en los astilleros de Gdansk, y el teatro es abierto, tiene estas grandes puertas para que las funciones puedan ser abiertas al exterior, y trabaja esta idea de Richard Serra de la sombra, ¿no? Del volumen oscuro con contornos sin definición, y tanto en los cielos rasos, en los interiores y en los exteriores se explora esta idea. El museo tiene una galería alrededor que venía dada por el código urbano, y esta galería lo lleva a pensar en la idea de umbrales, de transiciones entre espacios para desarrollar todo el proyecto. Hay algunos cuartos que miran al exterior, que son de madera como en Glenstone, la escalera es como el elemento central, y es un edificio de recintos, solo que en vez de estar separados como en Glenstone, están todos unidos dentro de un volumen. el piso alto se ilumina cenitalmente y el primer piso tiene como toda esta banda, como este clerestorio que permite entrar en la luz natural también a las salas. Okay, so this was great, Tom. Thank you so much. This was a great lecture, and I absolutely love the work, but it's always very different when you hear all the ideas and all the explanations and the story behind projects, like all the images that maybe you saw a million times on the internet, they suddenly come to life and they get a new depth. So thank you for this. I will start with a few questions, but then professors can also join into the conversation, and the students can write their questions in the YouTube chat, and we will read them. You can write them in English, in Spanish, however you feel comfortable. My first question is about your image now and your office. In your image now, in your website, and in your presentation, we can see lots of physical models. You're surrounded by lots of materials and physical models. And my question is, they're not only physical models, but they're big handmade models, which is kind of unusual now. What's the role of these models in your design process? And in more general terms, how do you feel about the importance of models in the contemporary production of architecture?
Well, it's hard to think that we could make a work of architecture without models. And also from the very beginning with a study of materials. And I'm a little bit old-fashioned this way, I think, but I like to build very big models so that I can climb into the space or begin to better experience the space. And so we have a very small model shop here. You can see it on our website under models. And you can see all of the models that we built of all different scales, but particularly when you're dealing with these rooms with art, you want to be able to feel the scale of those rooms as best you can. And the way to do that is to build them big. See the painting on the wall, see a scale figure, try to climb into them and experience them. And they have become a critical part of our process here, for sure.
It's interesting because after the pandemic, we worked for a long time at the university without building actual physical models. So now there's a strong reluctancy from students to go back to models. That's one of the reasons.
Well, you know, we had exactly the same experience. Because we couldn't come back to the office, we couldn't get to the model shop. So we didn't build so many models during the pandemic, and it was, I think, to say the least, I really missed them. You know, but as we start to come back now, we're going to start again.
And let me ask you also about the way you think of the structure in your projects. It seems to me that in your earlier projects, like the houses in Fisher Island and Long Island, the structure was very innovative, and it was very evident also that the structural design and the structural sophistication, and in a way was like opposing building to the landscape. In these projects, structure is still sophisticated, it's still very developed, but it seems to me like this is harder to read. Like when you explain the Corning Art Museum, you can see how complex the structure really is, but it's not evident at first glance when you enter into the building. Would you agree with this, that now in your work, structure, while still being important and sophisticated in a way, is more at the service of abstraction and generating a new interior landscape?
Well, you know, the more time that passes here, the clearer this transition for us was here. You know, I went to the American Academy in Rome back in 1996, and I was taken around by for a year with archaeologists and special people who understood Roman ruins, and I learned a lot, but didn't really understand how to apply it to the work at all. And so the work until about 2009 was principally very light. It was very much about expressing the thinness and the lightness of architecture. And so you, like in the Fisher's Island house, the structure is clear, it's light, it's simple, it has an order. And then all of a sudden, there was the financial crisis. And what that offered, like the pandemic, was a time for silence, to think. And right at that moment, the Glenstone Museum happened. We started working on that, and all of a sudden, those feelings of Rome finally, I started to feel this sense of weight, of heaviness, of load-bearing walls. And so I think that Warsaw, I think that Corning, I think that Glenstone are all very heavy projects. They're rooms rather than open pavilions. And they have that sense of weight and that sense of mass and that sense, I think, of strength. And that happened because the Glenstone project was the thing that started us to think about how to put these buildings in the land in a different way in the order of the structure and the transparency.
Thank you. Quien quiera abrir el micrófono y preguntar, pueden preguntar en inglés, si quieren en castellano y traducimos.
Yo tengo. I can start. Hi, Thomas. Thank you for the beautiful lecture.
No, it's nice to meet you.
I want to ask if you can explain your position in architecture in relation to art. Because I think that what you do, I mean, has a lot to do with the artistic part of the architecture. And I wonder, how do you do that when you have to design a house or maybe works that maybe you have to put yourself a little behind and in the expression as part of the discipline?
Well, you know, I love art and I love contemporary art. And I think there's always a very, very fine line about making the rooms that are the containers for these works either too simple and completely whitewashed in the way that I would describe the galleries at MoMA here in New York, Museum of Modern Art. It's just a white box, ceilings white, or whether the rooms have a certain character. And I think over time, and I can see this as time passes, I think we have taken this notion of light and the way that light is gathered from the sky and the way light begins to penetrate through the architecture and to fall on the art. We have taken that as a moment to begin to express the nature of that light and how it's made and how it works. And that, I believe, is for us that balance, that the art rooms become very quiet in amongst themselves, and then above, in the way that the light comes down, then that becomes more articulate. It becomes expressive about what it is. And I think that we usually have 2 or 3 houses going in the office all at the same time. And I think the houses have probably informed the bigger projects more than we would like to admit. And I think in those, we learn about the connection to nature. We learn about the connection to light. We learn about living in nature. And I think those rooms have turned out to be very simple, where the idea moves from framing a view, having the movement of light as an experience. So I think there is a lot of cross-pollination there, if you will, a lot of crossing values. That's a good question. I haven't really thought about that in a long time.
Si quieren, los alumnos, los invito a escribir en el chat de YouTube las preguntas que quieran hacerle a Tom y las leemos por acá. Anímense. Y también los docentes, que abran el micrófono y siéntanse libres de preguntar.
So, I want to talk. I want to. Hello, Thomas. How are you?
Hi there. How are you?
Fine. Thanks for your lecture. And I was thinking about that you talked about a direct relationship between the objects that you're going to show in the museums that you've designed, and then the way of showing the objects. Or maybe with the artists too. You're working side by side with the artists, and then you know how to show the collections. I was wondering if you had any project that you didn't know the collection that is going to be shown. For example, in Europe, in the beginning of 90 or 2000, since Getty's Museum in Bilbao, all the cities were thinking about getting a big museum project, and some projects and some museums were empty of works of arts. It was like you should have a museum like Getty's in Bilbao to put and situate the city in the art map. So you've done the opposite. You've studied the objects that you're going to be shown in the museum, and get a personal relation and maybe a little bit in love with the works of art that you're going to be to put in your architectural projects. So I was wondering this. Did you have any chance to make these kind of buildings, but without knowing or sharing the collection that you're going to be shown?
That's an excellent question. And I think with Glenstone, we did have very specific rooms where we worked with the artist. It was his or her work that was there. And those rooms were very specific about the artist's wishes in proportion and light, everything. But then when it came to Warsaw, what was really interesting to me, because we didn't know exactly what was going in all of these rooms.
Yes.
But the director there, who is a remarkable woman, I mean, changed my life, remarkable woman. she didn't want to make big flexible rooms. She wanted to make these rooms, and we have 4 quadrants of them. She wanted to make all the rooms never the same size. There's some that vary in height. And because she wanted the curators and the art to respond to the room. So that rather than like Glenstone, where the art is the first thing that comes, and then the room happens.
Yeah.
In Warsaw, and I think that comes from this mentality in Europe, going back to Amsterdam, where these villas were there. And they used these, I don't know, 17th, 18th century villas there that had very fixed rooms, and they curated those rooms beautifully in the Netherlands and in Germany and in Switzerland and in France. They didn't start off with these big, and I think there is this sense in Europe that you build rooms for art, even though you don't know what they're going to be. You make a room, and the curators then are trying to curate an exhibition. And the curators then have to think about these with the architecture. Now in North Carolina, the first museum that we showed, it didn't matter. They did, in fact, want a flexible museum, but not a big open plan. They wanted the ability to move the art everywhere, but never rebuilding the walls, which was another interesting take, that you design these rooms, you open some up, you close some down. They never have 4 corners. All of the rooms bleed together, into one pavilion. And it was the same in Corning. They wanted rooms there for those works, those soft rooms, but they didn't know what was going to go in them either. And so it's a little bit, you have to listen to the curators in there, which is something that I love to do. I don't want to come in and dictate what this should be. I love listening. I love the conversation that happens. So when we got there to Warsaw, and she said, I really want these rooms. And I was kind of taken aback, but we went to visit a lot of museums in Europe, and they were, there is this way that they understand rooms and art that's not Glenstone, but is this historical model that's become very important to their history.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
We have many questions from the students now. I will read some of them. How did you end up approaching the area of museums? And if you could choose a type of project that you would like to do, what would it be?
Well, I've had my practice for over 25 years, and if I could figure out where the work actually comes from, I'd be a genius. I have absolutely no idea. And so the fact that we've been blessed with these museum projects is, I just don't know how that happens, So I don't understand that. But what I would really like to do is a chapel, is a church. I want to find somewhere in the world where I can do a church, a big or small meditative space. That's what I want to do, because with all of the kind of reference and the research that we've done around this slow experience and getting lost and framing, and I really want a space where you are there to have that experience, that sacred experience.
Thank you. I read a couple more. Should we consider light as a material or as an architectural resource? And how does light relate to mass and void in architecture?
Well, I should have probably said this in my talk, light is the first material. Light is the first material. And if you think of light that way, it goes back to my love again for Lucan. You know, a room doesn't become a room until light comes and begins to define its presence. I mean, there was nobody better at understanding the presence of light and the importance of light in architecture, how it shapes the experience, how it shapes and defines space. I do think of it more, though, as not particularly defining, well, I really think of light as experience, I think, more than anything else. As moving through light, of seeing the changing light in a space, of understanding how a light begins to hit a surface and beginning to heighten your experience with that particular material. So, you know, our work is very direct. It's very simple in a way. And most of the projects are of different materials, so that it is about the materials and it is about the light, how the light moves, how the light is involved, gets involved with the material.
Thank you. And here somebody is asking us, how is the process and treatment of nature and landscaping in the courtyards? How do you treat those spaces to achieve the high level of sensitivity that you're showing?
Well, you know, the landscape is clearly important. And, you know, I had this remarkable mentor at the beginning of my life as an architect. And his name was Dan Kiley, who was the amazing, remarkable American landscape architect that worked with Eero Saarinen and worked with, and he, for some reason, it's still a mystery to me long after his passing, how he just embraced me and taught me. And his word constantly to me was that the land and the architecture want to be inseparable. And then what I've learned since then is that it's the light that's also inseparable from the architecture of the land. That it's the land, it's the architecture, and it is what the nature of that room is. So Dan Kiley taught me about this kind of nesting of these ideas. And his last project was my first project. And we worked on this house together called the Taconic House up in the Hudson River Valley outside of New York. And that was the final lesson about this inseparability for me. So we worked hard to make the connection. We have very close relationships with our landscape architects to make a work where the two are copacetic.
Thank you, Thomas. I don't know if somebody else wants to pose a last question. We have many from the students, but about the light and things that you mentioned and other questions, so we'll not repeat them. This was really great, Thomas. Like we're all impressed, and we're very happy to have had this chance to discuss these ideas with you and to know all the details about this fantastic projects. This is a bad part of the good part of this long distance lectures is that it's really fast to easy to connect, and you're not spending 12 hours on a plane, but then you would like to stay talking for a longer time to go for lunch or whatever, and it's just not possible. But well, I just hope that sometime you have the chance to visit us in Buenos Aires, or that we can visit you in your office in New York. So thank you so much. We really appreciate your taking time to lecturing and also to talking to us to answering our questions and having this discussion with us.
Well, it is such an honor for me to meet you. And I hope one day when I come to South America, working in Bogota, that I can sneak down to see you. It has been really great to meet, and again, thank you so much. It's nice to meet